main members of the Chaos Computer Club in Germany. He's been a member since 1986, and he was appointed a spokesman for the club in 1990, and later served on its board until 2012. He has an extraordinary rich history in security software, and at the sharp end of a great deal of what we're here, in fact, to discuss over the next couple of days. But he's also worked very closely with some German press in regard to the recent disclosures of Snowden, and I thought he would actually want to speak to us today directly about that. Andy.
Yes, in a way. So indeed, I've been working with Laura Poitras and Jacob Appelbaum a long time before Snowden came up, and kind of brought them also to the Spiegel, and we were involved in the reporting there. But as I have to make rather critical remarks about journalism and things about that, I decided to try to start with the good news, so that we have a bit of a positive moment also. So very rough speaking, game theory applying, information society, what's the framework? We do have almost total telecommunications surveillance worldwide, and the previous speakers have pointed that out in more detail. However, we also on the internet have at least an achievable with some, you might have to use Tor and other measures in some jurisdictions, but we do have kind of free flow of information. It is possible to use end-to-end encryption, including taking care of the environment. With the environment, I mean here the machine you're using the encryption tools, because if you don't take care of the operating system, encryption might be undermined by stealing the secret keys, by stealing the unencrypted data, and so on. But it is possible. And we can apply anonymization techniques to all of this through, for example, using Tor. So the good news is cryptography works. And that the fact that we were able to bring Snowden, at least to Moscow, that Sarah was able to get in contact with him and so on, is a pretty good proof on it, because you can bet that the NSA had some interest in him when he was in Hong Kong, already published and so on. So this good news led to almost positive reactions, as we have seen. And we have seen almost happy people, as well as almost normal events. And that was for me more shocking than everything else, that you could close down 7 European countries' airspace just on the suspicion that Snowden would be on board of the Bolivian presidential, by the way, diplomatic protected plane. And it was perceived normal that US just makes a phone call. There's no political decision in that country. It's just the US makes a phone call and the airspace is closed down for this plane. It was kind of, that shows us a little bit that there is obviously some gravity involved here that the US would maybe not like to unfold. So what's the NSA stuff about? It's about us and our digital environment, and there is this treasure map presentation that is pretty at the core. Treasure map is just a visualization tool of the data gathered by the NSA. It's about mapping not less than the whole internet, any device, anywhere, all the time. So it's a real-time thing about us and our devices, the exploitability, meaning if the connection lines and the devices we use are already intercepted or allow already manipulation, or if it's just one step ahead, if they need to figure out what kind of operating system, browser, and so on we use to apply measures. And this terminology is what drives me a little bit, because if you see this slide here, where the mission of the NSA defines itself as working on these 3 below layers, the logical network layer, the physical network layer. So it's about how the devices interact with each other, how the physical locations of these devices, where they are, and then we come to the geographic locations of them. But if you look at the top 2 layers here, the persona layer, by the way, that's us, and the devices we use, the so-called cyber persona layer, you see this small terminology here, we enable. So what the fuck does we enable mean? Now, seriously, that's a serious question because for some people out there, it might mean a drone strike, a targeted killing. It might make other things, but it raises a serious question because I think this is one of the dimensions that's missing, and that's understanding the scope of the material in the context of the NSA structure, meaning the material that Snowden brought, and also the structure of the NSA within the United States government. Snowden comes from departments S3 and below. That's technical organization of data. That's about systems that are deployed to organize data, to organize attacks in order to exploit technology out there. But what's important is to understand that there's stuff below. So I've been able to discuss this with William Binney, one of the first NSA whistleblowers, at great lengths, so to understand how this whole thing is driven. Because above the department where Snowden works in, the S2 guys doing the analytics and the S3 guys organizing the data, there's a department called S1 called Customer Relations. And please think about this very careful, because the NSA is nothing else than a service company for other parts of the United States government that order, that like inquire data, and by the way, that pay for the service, so to say. As we all have seen, the NSA's infrastructure is quite expensive, so there must be some use of it somewhere. So we have not really a systematic list of the customers. We neither have the customer records or the inquiries they make, because the systems, the material, mostly comes from those guys organizing the technical systems. So it's presentations about how these systems work. And there's examples. That's why we have Merkel and others. There's small little examples in there. But what we are not seeing here is the whole stream of events, so that there is a customer of the NSA making an inquiry about a person, about a situation, about maybe a political thing, maybe an economic thing. So we have excerpt of that customer list. We know Department of Commerce is in it, as the CIA is, as the Department of Defense is, and so on. So these guys have a liaison officer to the NSA, and at the NSA side, there's someone taking their wishes, then creating what's called a ROPI, meaning a request, to simplify it a little bit. And that ROPI then identifies what's the email address, the phone numbers of that requested person, and that creates a task, a TOPI. Tasking means that the systems that collect data worldwide use these tasking parameters as a filter and then submit that information that matches the filter rules, meaning, for example, Merkel's phone number, to, and now we come to the right side of the game. So they deliver then the raw data to those guys who first of all collect the data and then write reports based on the raw data. And this goes back to the customers, and there's a negotiation level here. For example, you find out that you're tasking someone, and that person has maybe two persons he's talking to most of the time, like his personal secretary, chief of staff, whatever. And then you can say, well, shouldn't we test them as well? Shouldn't we make the scope a little bigger? Or what's your interest of expertise? But this whole dimension is missing in the public perception for the moment, although this diagram, which, by the way, I made myself, so this is not an official diagram. I was just spending a few hours with Binney doing this, gives you an idea, and you can also compare it with the official organigram of NSA. So it's, I would say it's roughly accurate. So still what's missing, if we say, okay, there's customers of the NSA, and the NSA is as a service organization organizing the data, the question is what they do with the data. So what can we imagine? Of course, we can imagine like blackmailing, we can imagine bribery, we can imagine all kinds of things. So, but still, what we don't really have is the value of the data. So how is it being used? And to come to that question, I want to quote the lexicon, actually, the terminology of East German intelligence. They had this term compromat. Compromat is, in the terminology of the MFS, is a description of circumstances about the life of a person that is in contradiction to norms, assumptions of society, or his allies, and which public disclosure would lead to legal, disciplinary sanctions, the damage of prestige, reputation, in the circle of also those people who are befriended with that person. So it's that stuff that you don't want to have public. And that stuff is, of course, what the intelligence cybernetically is looking for. That's the value of information. That's where you can change people's behavior, bring them to a different decision, and so on. Snowden himself gave an example of how, in his previous position, working for the CIA, he described a formative incident where the CIA wanted to recruit a specific Swiss banker for getting information about that banking customers and so on. So they made him drunk. They knew he had a little alcohol habit. They made him drunk. They encouraged to drive him home. He says, not a problem, you're not drunk. Take the car, no worries. Then he thought to have gotten into police control. It was actually CIA guys in Swiss police uniforms, but he didn't do that. And then his friends from the drinking event before came up and offered to help him. So he got kind of rescued by the people who created the problem he wouldn't have had without them. And that's, if we look at this from a procedural point of view. So you have technical surveillance applied to a person. You can study his character, his social surrounding. You know where he is, with whom he is, what he's doing. You learn that person. So you understand his weak points in the characters and the attack options, so to say. You can then create a compromising situation, and then you can help him. That's one of the options. And I discussed this with Binny again at great lengths, and I said, well, isn't this, in more simple words, isn't it like blackmailing? That you say, you know, you don't want that. And he said, no. You know, it's more sophisticated because they found out that if you're blackmailing people, there is quite a chance that people will create a blockade. So if they're feeling pressured, they will not do what you want to do. So the methodology they use is called gray mailing. And it goes like this. Let's say you are in an international trade agreement, or you are in a mergers and acquisition situation, and you have a 300-page contract, and you're sitting there with this American guy on the table. And on page 120, the American guy says, oh, you know, here, paragraph 3, sentence 4, you know, we don't like it. And I think you also wouldn't like that we talk about that situation in the hotel in Prague the other day. So why don't we, you know, understand each other, right? Don't you agree? Oh, yeah, you agree, great. So, of course, we could put it in more simple words, like, well, just getting an offer you can't refuse. But the point is that we are really having a lack of this dimension at the moment, and we have other lacks. So I'm coming to that. So to understand the other lacks that we have, I'm trying, again, we saw this slide before. By the way, my favorite is not the green points, but the yellow ones. We could talk about that. That's the international implants that indeed are violations of other countries' sovereignty, where the US does not only passively take some data, but actively interfere with the infrastructure and redirects traffic and that kind of things. So roughly the signal intelligence part of NSA are 5 departments. That's the special source guys. That's actually encouraging by either monetary or other ways carriers, so international telecommunication companies. We just had this Vodafone example at great extent, Vodafone cable, to organize data. Then we have the global access operations. That's what Duncan talked about earlier, like the classical Echelon, now called Forensat and so on, guys who just take what's out there unknowingly sometimes to the operators. Then it's getting more delicate if we look at the active measures where they tailor access operations, which means they hack into things, until the point where the CNE team comes in and is even weakening encryption and security standards out there. And then we have this department called SCS working together with the CIA actually to break into places, bug their cables, and interfere otherwise. But this is not a lecture about I'm doing that at other places. This is not about a lecture about how the inner workings of each of these departments works. What I really want to talk about is the missing bits in the reporting so that we understand what we're not seeing yet. I was, to explain that, of course, we have to look at the publication methodology. And yeah, well, to state the obvious, it's pretty complicated. So this is my rough overview of the limitations I'm seeing in the media mechanisms, the implications it has in this publication process about the Snowden material. So I have, just for the moment, here created 7 different points, and each of them has a slide, so no worries. It's the shitting in the pants problem, it's the legal considerations, it's the audience address perception issues, the technical complexity, the overcoming of the abstraction, and the, yeah, you know, I could call it journalistic Machiavelism, and that would more be in line with John Pilger's very encouraging talk about how journalists see their role. Some journalists out there maybe want to change the world, others want to make a great career, and some of them think it's best to sing the government song to make a great career, so to say. So it's about the attitude involved in the whole process, which requires a critical review. So, and these 7 points come next to the normal madness of the media game, where there's competition between publishers. There is the issue that once you published, for example, raw material from the Snowden archive, there is other publishers that will say, no, we don't refer to it, we don't accept articles with it because it was published by the competition and also it was a month ago, so it's old shit. So instead of that, you create more value by creating more pieces of the puzzle out there. You sometimes decrease the value of things just because of the stupidity or the madness, or however we call it, of the media organization's game. Then the scooping attitude, I need to be faster than you, and so on. And then very individual moments where, oh, we can't publish this because it's going to be in Glenn's books in 3 months. So could you please hold it and forget the story you just wrote? So coming to the 7 points, the shitting in the pants limitation was just recently disclosed by Laura in an interview with the Daily Beast, where she told about the Guardian's role in Hong Kong, where they decided to destroy the material that Snowden had given them. They were freaking out. It was making them afraid. Well, that's a human thing, and we should maybe not judge badly about people with human behavior. However, from a journalistic point of view, that should at least be reflected somehow. I mean, that is a limitation, that if stuff makes you scared, so you're not even accepted as source material. That's a pretty heavy decision. And I mean, my old friend Michael Sontheimer, who's sitting there, he said, you know, in the old days, journalists were working to change the world. These days, they work to win journalist prizes. Well, okay, we can say the journalist prizes have their justification so that people have, you know, reputation, and there's a positive, also competition doesn't always have to be negative. You want to be going farther than the other guys and so on. But if that's the case, then we also need, next to the Hall of Fame, we need also the Hall of Shame, where those journalists that were going hand in hand with creating the Iraq War get their tiny little figure, maybe we could take some golden toilet brushes or whatever, to, you know, remind us that things are not always going great, and sometimes we need to think how to overcome the limitations of the game. So number 2 is very specific in this scenario. Snowden did choose, unfortunately, only 2 American journalists to hand over the material. And of course, they had to go and consult American lawyers. So we have jurisdiction, US jurisdiction in the game. And the legal advice they got was, yeah, you know, there's a US Secrecy Act, so you can't systematically publish methods. You cannot name intelligence officers. That's like a felony. You go to jail if you do that. You cannot hand over the material to anybody out there because that would make you subject to prosecution, same way that Snowden will be prosecuted for handing over it to you, except that you can publish quotes from the material in the public interest. But what kind of public interest is that? So the judgment, what is public interest, becomes the key of the whole thing. And that is kind of also based on a US audience. If the US audience and the US judge will think it was not public interest, then from an American legal point of view, you're fucked. And that has implications on the behavior of those involved who had to be in the process all the way, because it was, so to say, their material and their responsibility. And that's, please don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing the people involved here. We're all human beings, but I'm just trying to make you understand their specific role or also conditions. So, as I said, the question of public interest is my third point, is becoming important, asking the question, which audience are we talking about? Because if we're talking about the Chinese population, well, their public interest would be sure to have full knowledge of like every single bit in the Snowden material, while the Russian population would also have, by the way, Indian with over 1 billion people, they should also have some saying, but this is not how the game is being played, because the previous NSA whistleblowers, also their turning point was not when everybody on the planet was intercepted, it was when American people were intercepted. That was making them unwell. Until then, it was all legit. It was all like, yeah, that's how it is. So we can argue that, of course, it's an important point for an American audience here and there, but it also means that we deprioritize the human rights of non-American people. And I mean, while the US is having that attitude, well, okay, that's how it is. But it's sad to see that that attitude goes into this kind of publication process, which has worldwide implications again, where which journalists are accepted to cooperate, which media partners are accepted, what attitude is the legal representative of this and that. So you get the picture, I guess. So next point, this now where it's getting even more complicated, is the perception of legitimate action by the NSA. So to my shocking surprise, Bamford and Duncan, James Bamford and Duncan, they both said some sentences that the NSA has maybe some legitimate grounds. I thought we'd agree that a secret, non-accountable agency has no legitimation. But, well, the point is that the publication process has been often about the question if the action described in the document and being the basis of the reporting isn't describing some kind of a legitimate action. And there we come to the narrative, just as John said it earlier, the narrative of terrorism, the narrative of criminal activity. I mean, I'm in an advisory board of a strange school in Germany, and I'm sitting there with the head of Europol, the old guy who created that agency. He uses to say sentence like, if we would overcome prohibition, the police could finally again start to fight criminality. So if we look at the war on drugs, the war on this, the war on that, what the US all invented, question of legitimate activity is a complex one. And it is a political one, I would also say. So, so Snowden did not want to be the person deciding about it. He said, I'm not the story here. You decide that. I trust your responsible judgment and what is to be reported and what not. However, even when he was in Russia, clearly outside of the reach of the US law enforcement, I wouldn't say that those involved said, well, it doesn't matter now because Snowden is safe, and now we can address global issues to the humans of this planet. It was still, creating the narrative or changing the narrative in the US and so on. And then there was always the fear of, couldn't they accuse us if we publish this or that, and then it might lead to US intelligence persons in that and that country being thrown out or being killed? Couldn't it bring us the accusation of we have blood on our hands? That's like the old, yeah.
Can I just ask you, who gave this argument?
People involved in the process.
Okay.
Allow me to be not, so I guess you get the picture anyhow. So the blood on the hand thing, by the way, I think we could argue it two ways. Of course, if we publish the specific location of an NSA location in the Middle East and the government or the people outside in that area would just come and kill that American people, then yeah, that would be maybe not that great. However, if we don't do that, the Americans keep on with their drone strikes killing innocent people. So we have blood on our hands, like we have two options of blood on our hands. It's not that we have clear hands or we are in shit. We are in shit anyhow. Just question is the depths of the shit we're into. So from this perspective and from this background, it maybe is becoming better understandable why spying on American people is totally different judged than people on the rest of the world. Because, as I mentioned it earlier, we're dealing with American citizens here. So, but it's fair to say that the cultural perception, I'm not American, I'm a German citizen, so of what is legitimate US NSA actions and also those in the process involved, that was heavily disputed, as you can imagine. So we had our fun. Okay, coming to other issues, technical complexity, of course, it's fair to say that some presentations to impress the superiors inside the NSA that we got through Snowden were pretty easy to understand. And it has a reason why many people called the NSA stuff the PRISM scandal. Because PRISM has 5 letters, it's easy to pronounce, and it's slightly less complicated than X-keyscore or Honey Bunny or other kind of shitty code names they use. So I learned that, like Binny warned me, don't get confused by the code words. The code words are meant to confuse people. So look at the technical structure. However, so I think it's totally fair and accurate and important to reduce complexity in the reporting and to simplify things. That's important to make more people understand the issue. I'm not criticizing that. However, the same point of view, I'm also a technical guy, and I think it's very important for the technical community to get all the details of the most complex systems of the NSA so that we understand how they attack our communication systems, how they attack our security infrastructure, encryption systems, and so on, so that we can counteract. And that's maybe not the role that the big media organizations can play, but maybe they at least have to see that this is a legitimate interest also in the game. So there is, as you have all seen, things that are easy to understand, like the supply chain interdiction, where the US just takes specific Cisco switches that are shipped to customers worldwide, build something in, ship it on. But there's more complex stuff that's not so easy to understand if it comes to how they break SSL all the way. I'm not going into details now as I'm running out of time. So for the last point, the overcoming abstraction problem, that was an experience we had in the publication process. So we started with a story of the communication of 80 million German people being intercepted. We had this boundless informant heat map showing that how much they collected and so on. But to be honest, no one gave a shit. Then later, we had Merkel's phone call and phone number in that list. And there was a huge mess all over the country. So this has to do with the missing ability of many people's abstraction, understanding how it affects their life. So what SIGINT means for them, for their life, for the economy of the country, and so on. So this is key if we want to do impact maximization. We need to use their principles and we need to understand them better. As otherwise we run into the issue as how Merkel did it. Merkel does her whole public appearance is based on every 2 weeks she's doing a poll with 35,000 people, identifying the most important issues. And since August last year, the NSA Snowden stuff was ranging at about 6%. So she decided to totally ignore it. 6% of the population, ignore it. So she didn't talk about it anymore. And that has to do with our missing ability to make people understand that this is important for them. So it's also same important, that's why I started with the other thing, that there's a positive message involved, because if people only hear things that make them depressed, oh, they are intercepting us here, 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 and here, and I can do nothing about it because I'm a sheep. So the understanding that crypto and operational security can protect you is important. It's important to have a positive, also to show the people there is a way to act. And at the end, there is then this thing I mentioned with the journalistic attitude. So we also had situations where we thought our article was done, the material was redacted, legal was okay, editorial was fine, and then person comes and says, oh, did you confront the NSA? Did we what? Oh yeah, did you send them the list of the material we published and get their reply? No, not yet. So, so we had this, confrontation situations where the GCHQ, by the way, never comments anything. The NSA comes with, but this will interfere with operations. You can't publish that. This will do that. This will that. So they will want to argue that you shouldn't publish at all and go home and have a nice day. That is, of course, slowing down the process. Then you need a second round of legal considerations and so on. So that makes you understand why maybe the publishing is also not that fast and effective all the way. But then there's also the journalistic context in the perception of the intelligence. So for an intelligence agency, it's of course interesting. The GCHQ, by the way, always said, oh, before we comment on the matter, could you please send out the list of all the persons involved in your editorial process as well as their contact details. So, and the shoe numbers and phone numbers of their girlfriends and drug preferences, of course they wanted everything. So that sounded like shit. But also, some of the journalists involved in the process were behaving carefully to say a little bit different than the others, because they said, I don't want to be rude to these NSA guys, because next week I'm sitting there on another conference and I had this before, when we were rude to them, they don't talk to me at all. So I'm not getting any information anymore for my reporting on other issues. So dependencies of the journalist involved in their career and their, being friendly with them. And that's a two-way game, as we obviously can imagine. And then at last, I just have it mentioned, the idea of balanced reporting. My God, if that idea would have been out there when Adolf Hitler took over, yeah? Oh, shouldn't we ask the Nazis, Goebbels should have his statement also in our reporting about the killing of the Jews, right? I mean, come on, we need to make balanced reporting, right? I mean, come on, that can't be it. If we're talking about massive violation of human rights worldwide. I'm not sure if okay, this is a great point to discuss, but maybe later. So then we have all the editorial policies, of course, which, by the way, could have played differently. So if the Guardian is seeing problems in the UK, if they would be just willing to partner, we could have played cross-jurisdiction, but partnering in the media world of competition is, of course, unthinkable. Then we have legal consideration when naming companies and implications for governmental relations. So, and just one last example, then I'm done. So the wording attitude of some of the guys involved, I also found surprisingly. For example, here Reuters reports about the RSA company who took $10 million to change the encryption of their products to a way to simplify it that they can intercept the stuff. And what does Reuters write? NSA infiltrated them. Infiltrated, hello, they paid $10 million for it. That's a customer relationship. That's a company providing a service. Where's the infiltration bit here? It's not in there. So this maybe has to do with US jurisdiction and, oh, they could sue us if we, accuse them of this and that. And I see that we have to be very careful about and very accurate about our wording, but it can't be that we start to not tell the truth anymore because of this. So at the end, and this is really my last slide, I want to give you the constructive ideas that I'd like to spread to maximize impact. So what we need, I think, is decentral contextualization, exactly what WikiLeaks did with the diplomatic cables. You have journalists worldwide analyzing the material in their local context, writing the stories, then cross-referencing to the publishing of the material, so that you don't have material without context and you don't have context without material. We do need studying groups that also include guys doing the technical analytics. We do need cross-jurisdiction publication methods, because if you can't publish it in one country, you can publish it in another. Same principle Amnesty International uses for many years, that the guys in the country never address the issues, always the guys from the neighboring country. So that's old tactics that we should apply here. And also, most important, I think this patterns where the SIGINT data is being used, where the customer relations and all that comes into the game. That really has the option to bring us more impact. So also about the cost of political and economic decision space. Okay, that was it.
Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you.